Good evening. It is 5:30 p.m. and I call to order the October 18th, 2022 Board of Trustees meeting. Do I hear a motion to enter executive session?
Madam Chair, I move the board enter an executive session to discuss 22-23 employment recommendations and to receive legal advice in the matter of Garris versus Lexington County School District One.
Thank you, Dr. Powers. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Is there any discussion? All right. I'll just mention for the record, Ms. Garris has submitted the following recusal statement as of December 4th, 2018. In accordance with Section 9-13-700B, I hereby abstain from all votes, deliberations, and other action on the following matter. Jada Garris, individually and on behalf of all others similarly situated versus Lexington County School District 1, case number 2017-CP-32-0435. Reasons for disqualification is that I am a litigant in the above described matter who possesses a financial interest in its outcome. All right. All in favor of the motion to enter executive session, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? And the motion carries. We will now enter into executive session. back. Sorry for the slight tardiness. All right, we are back. Do I hear a motion to conclude executive session and return to general session?
Madam Chair, I move that the board conclude executive session and return to general session.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Do I have a second? Second. Thank you, Ms. Henson. Is there any discussion? All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion carries. I call to order the general session of the October 18th board meeting. The district is in compliance with the South Carolina Freedom of Information Act by notifying the media of the date, time, and place of the meeting. The district tapes the meeting for accuracy in preparing the minutes. At this time, I yield the floor to Ms. Kathy Henson.
Please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you very much. Do I hear a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
Madam Chair, I move that the board approve the agenda as presented.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Henson. Is there any discussion? All right, hearing none. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? And the motion carries. Board members, you have received the minutes of the September 6th, September 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, and 16th, 13th, and 27th, 2022 board meetings. Boy, we met a lot in September. Other than the corrections that have been received and made, are there any other corrections? All right, hearing none, the minutes will be accepted as presented. Do I hear a motion that the board approve 3 certified recommendations for the 2022-2023 academic year?
Madam Chair, I move that the board approve 3 certified recommendations for 2022-23 academic year.
Thank you, Mr. Oswald. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Powers. Is there any discussion? All right. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? And the motion carries. Do I hear a motion that the board approve 2 administrative recommendations for the 2022-2023 academic year?
Madam Chair, I move that the board approve 2 administrative recommendations for 2022-2023 academic school year.
Thank you, Mr. Oswald. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Is there any discussion? All right, hearing none. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? And the motion carries. Do I hear a motion for the board to accept the newly hired support staff report for 2022-2023 as presented by administration?
Madam Chair, I so move.
Thank you, Mr. Oswald. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Is there any discussion? And I'm just going to say, Ms. Freeman, I know you're here on behalf of Ms. Price. I just want to thank you for all the work y'all are continuing to do. The school year may be underway. I guess we're 9 weeks in now, aren't we? But y'all are keeping us on track. So thank you so much for the work y'all are doing.
We are thankful for all of your support and the support at the schools and across our team. And together we will keep plugging along and moving forward.
Oh, I know the HR is a 365-day, 24/7 job. So thank you so much.
There's no hiring season anymore. It is all hiring season.
All the time. All right. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? And the motion carries. All right, the board received legal advice in the matter of Garris versus Lexington County School District One. That was for information only, and no action will be taken. All right, now we are at honors and achievements. And that is always the best part of the evening. Remember to grab your copy of Proof Positive, which is on the table out in the hall, that highlights our honorees. And take several copies to grandparents and relatives and neighbors. Put them in trick-or-treat baskets. That would be a great option for trick-or-treats. Once we finish, we will give our honorees a chance to leave before we resume the rest of the meeting. Dr. Postlethwaite, will you please step down front? We have 1 honoree tonight, so we want, when you hear your name, come and stand with Dr. Postlethwaite as we tell the audience all about you and your achievement. For a minute to get down there. All right. Thank you. Tonight, we are excited to have Annabelle Creech, a sophomore at Pillion High. Annabelle, please join Dr. Postlewaite up front. Annabelle won the state Green Hand Creed speaking contest this past summer at the South Carolina State FFA Convention. As a freshman, Annabelle competed in the regional Green Hand Creed speaking leadership development event and placed first, earning her a chance to compete at the state level. Because of her success at the state level, Creech will compete at the National FFA Convention in Indianapolis, Indiana next week. Creech currently serves as the Pillion High School FFA Chapter Secretary and Chairman of the Program of Activities Committee, where she oversees the development and implementation of the chapter's yearly calendar. Now, since the national competition is next week, I think we should give Annabelle the opportunity to practice in front of an audience. Annabelle, please take your place at the podium and begin when you are ready.
The FFA Creed by E.M. Tiffany. I believe in the future of agriculture, with a faith born not of words, but of deeds. Achievements won by the present and past generations of agriculturalists, and the promise of better days through better ways, even as the better things we now enjoy have come to us from the struggles of former years. I believe that to live and work on a good farm or to be engaged in other agricultural pursuits is pleasant as well as challenging, for I know the joys and discomforts of agricultural life and hold an inborn fondness for those associations, which, even in hours of discouragement, I cannot deny. I believe in leadership from ourselves and respect from others. I believe in my own ability to work efficiently and think clearly with such knowledge and skill as I can secure, and in the ability of progressive agriculturalists to serve our own and the public interest in producing and marketing the product of our toil. I believe in less dependence on begging and more power in bargaining, in the life abundant and enough honest wealth to help make it so for others as well as myself, in less need for charity and more of it when needed, and being happy myself and playing square with those whose happiness depends upon me. I believe that American agriculture can and will hold true to the best traditions of our national life, and that I can exert influence in my home and community, which will stand solid for my part in that inspiring task. Thank you.
And Annabelle, I think we have a few questions for you.
ma'am.
Nothing like a quiz when you're at our podium. You go first.
Annabelle, how has the FFA Creed impacted your life?
The FFA Creed has impacted my life in many ways. As I've taken the time to memorize the Creed and to learn all the words that it says and to see how they affect my lives and the other people's lives. When you think of those words, you think of ways that they can change the world and how they can change the future of not only agriculture, but of any job that you have to do. There's words in the Creed that have good things for everybody to learn and can put into their life. One way that the FFA Creed has affected my life is in the second paragraph when it says, I believe that to live and work on a good farm or to be engaged in other agricultural pursuits is pleasant as well as challenging. That line has affected my life because it lets me know that no matter what challenges I face, there's always going to be a joy that comes after I continue to push through.
Annabelle, in the last paragraph, I think you mentioned or stated that you believe American agriculture can and will hold true to the best traditions in our national life. What do you believe those best traditions to be?
Some of the best traditions of our national life are community, patience, hard work, and diligence. I think that one of the most important traditions that we have in agriculture and in anything is hard work. I'm a big believer that no matter what you do in life, where you want to be, you have to put the hard work behind it to get where you want to go. Another one of those is community. I'm a big believer that community is what we need. We need to be surrounded by people who care about us and care about what we're doing and are there for us to give a hand to them and for them to give a hand to us when needed. And so those are some of the best traditions of our national life that are shown in agriculture and in other places.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to give you another round of applause. Good job.
Thank you.
Well, Annabelle, great job. I can tell why you have succeeded so far at the local and state level, and I have no doubt that you will excel next week, and good luck.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how can I vote for you?
All right. Thank you for taking the time tonight to help us recognize an amazing student. We have some very talented individuals in our district, and we love sharing your achievements with our community and the folks here in the room. If you need to leave, we will give you a quick and quiet moment to do that right now. But you're welcome to stay. All right, we are moving on to the superintendent's report, and at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Postlethwaite.
Thank you very much. I would first like to ask you to look at this, at the paperclip packet that is at your desk. I want to make sure that you know that Dr. Phillips' presentation is copied for you and is the first handout in that packet. And as you're getting that ready, I would invite Dr. Phillips to the podium to review for us what we are considering the baseline data. This is where we stand after the storm of COVID has blown through for the past 2 years. We want to get a really good idea of where we are so that we'll know precisely where we need to grow in order to move our children where they want to be. Dr. Phillips?
Thank you. Madam Chair, Dr. Postlethwaite, members of the board, it's my pleasure tonight to present the annual data summary for the 2021-2022 school year. So we will start with SC Ready. As a reminder, SC Ready is given yearly to all students in grades 3 through 8 in the subjects of ELA and math. We are required to test 95% of our students in each of those subjects. Okay, so we'll start with a look at our percent of students meeting standard over time, just for the purposes of a trend. You can see that our trend in both ELA and math, ELA being the red line and math being the blue line, follows very similarly that pattern of the state, which is down at the bottom. You'll note that at both the state and district level, ELA scores have risen above the pre-COVID levels. Math has also increased slightly over last year, but is not experiencing the same rate of growth as ELA. So this is the percentage of students who scored meet or exceeds in ELA and math in the 2022 administration, represented here by grade. In ELA, this percentage lives right around 50 to 55% across all grades, decreasing slightly as grades increase. In math, there's a steady decrease as the grade goes up. So this slide represents the median state percentile. So we get state percentile ranks on SC Ready. We don't get them on the other state tests, but it's an interesting look at how the district does relative to the state. Now, obviously, the median percentile rank for the state in all of these is going to be 50. Okay.
Dr. Phillips, I'm
Yes.
sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
The previous slide.
Yes, ma'am.
Is that Lexington 1 or is that state?
This is Lexington 1,
Okay.
just for last year's administration,
Okay.
not over time. So again, red being ELA and blue being math. Correct.
Thank you.
So this, if you remember that the state median percentile is 50 by definition, then we can look at how well the district did relative to the state over time here in this particular graph. So you can see that in both spring of 18 and spring of 19, and just as another point here, I've removed 2020. If there were test scores in 2020, for which most of these there were not, I've removed those from the graph so that we can look at ones that have actual actionable data in them. So you can see that in 18 and 19, we were at 58%, the 58th percentile for both ELA and math, meaning that our students scored as well as or better than 58% of students in the state. In spring of 21, for both, it dropped to 55. You can see that now, even given the decreases that we saw in math across grade levels, we are performing relative to state a little bit better in math than in ELA, where our ELA is at 55 or 55th percentile. Our math is now up to the 57th, approaching that percentile of pre-COVID. Okay, so here is the same data, that median state percentile by grade. And you can see that it's relatively stable, but again, math seems to peek its head up a little bit. So this suggests that math has been a bit of a struggle across the state for just about everybody, and we are showing a little bit of a recovery in that area. And ELA is staying pretty steady across the board. Now, we're going to talk about that a little bit more later when we look at end of course tests, because there's been some interesting conversation around that sort of phenomenon.
So a question for you.
Yes, sir.
When we compare percentage meeting standard by grade, most recent 3 through 8, and we see the bar graph going, topping at 59% in grade 3 down to 32% at 8. Why does the median state percentile not reflect a similar pattern?
Because the state is seeing a similar pattern of performance.
The same, okay, so
that
gotcha.
percentile
So
is
it
gonna
holds
change.
true, it just extrapolates out, it holds true.
Correct.
Just the percentile stays the same.
Right, so that percentile is based on the scale score,
Gotcha.
and if the scale score of the whole state goes down, right, that percentile is going to fluctuate with it a little bit, and so that's the reason you don't see that steady decrease, because it's relative to the state performance.
Gotcha.
So the inference, again, without, in 8th grade, if Lexington 1 is performing at 32 percentile meeting standard, the state's probably at the 25th percentile.
Right.
Or some number like that.
Right, it would be slightly lower.
Yeah.
So in 8th grade, we're actually at the 57th percentile in math in 8th grade, which
Compared to the state
Compared to
standard,
state-
but only 32% of our students
Correct.
are meeting the
Right.
standard.
Right, so that means the state's performance dropped as well in 8th grade.
And if you think from a content perspective, probably the math content stays pretty stable through the elementary years. It's really in the middle school years where they start biting off truly big pieces of new knowledge.
So that, and anybody that can, like if you get behind
Right.
at any particular grade and you're not able to spiral up and build those scaffolds underneath for that math, then it just kind of builds and builds and builds and builds. Okay, other questions about SC Ready? Cool. Let's talk about SC Pass. So in addition to SC Ready, the state requires us to test students in grades 4 and 6 only on science on the SC Pass test. Again, keep in mind this is only grades 4 and 6. Again, we'll start with a trend over time. The top is Lexington 1, the bottom is the state. And you can see that the trend is almost identical. The shape is almost identical. We are making some recovery over the spring of 21 in science, but we are not back up to those pre-COVID levels as of yet. Here is the performance by grade from last year's exam. So we see that in grade 4, we had about 48% grade 6 about 51%, so about half of our kids are performing at standard or above standard on science. So next, we'll talk about end-of-course exams. So a reminder that the state requires that all students in Algebra 1, English 2, which is a little different, Biology 1, and U.S. History be assessed using an end-of-course exam at the end of the course. And then we're expected again to test at least 95% of students in those classes. And we're going to continue our conversation about the difference between math and ELA on this slide, because I think it's an interesting look at our data. So if you look over time here, again, Lexington 1 at the top, State at the bottom, you can see the trends follow the same shape. And what's interesting is with that 2020, again, those scores are not in there because we only had one semester of scores in that particular year. But if you look from 2019 to 2021, you'll notice that in every subject except for English, the scores take a pretty precipitous drop. And then they start bouncing back up this year. So we have pondered over this quite a bit. We've had conversations with internally, we've had conversations at the state level. We've looked at our practices in-house to see what's going on. And here is a working theory, and that is that conceptually, English doesn't change an awful lot over time. The concepts in English in 8th grade are very similar to the concepts in English 1, which are very similar to concepts in English 2. It goes a lot deeper, right? And you maybe go a little bit more in depth in things, but it stays pretty much the same. But if you take grade level math in 8th grade and then you go to Algebra 1, you're being introduced to an awful lot of new content. The same with biology, the same with U.S. history. So in addition, we are now talking about English 2, not English 1. So all of those English 2 kids have a year of high school English under their belt. So additional skill in English, skill that was developed at a high school rigor level. So what we see here is that the English scores are actually creeping up over time. And and what we're seeing in the other scores is that learning loss from COVID has a more profound effect. It's more pronounced in those other courses.
Dr. Phillips, I have a question
Yes, ma'am.
about the U.S. history, and this
Yes,
may be not a great question for right now, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Because my son was a junior last year and was in U.S. history, and he did not take the end-of-course exam. He said that his class had a pilot, and his whole class didn't take it. So is that a representative?
So the end-of-course test did not count last year.
Okay.
Because they're restructuring the standards and they did a pilot of the new standards. We did include any scores that we had here just for reference.
Dr. Phillips, I have a question too.
Yes, sir.
Looking at the Lexington 1 graph there, it looks like, if I'm reading this correctly, the biggest drop happened between 2019 and 2020. Is that correct?
Between 18-19 and 2020-2021.
Okay.
So that year that's missing there, we didn't have any, we had fall scores. But then
Okay.
we didn't test in the spring of that year. So what we're looking at is from the pre-COVID year to the year after the pandemic. So that was the
Okay.
big drop.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
That explains it. Thank you.
Well, I guess the interpretation of these two graphs, correct me if I'm wrong, but up until 2019, Lexington 1 performed above the state average in algebra, history, and biology.
Yes.
But during that 2 years of learning loss, we fell to the state average and actually fell below in biology. And then it looks like since then, biology is doing slightly better in the state, but algebra and U.S. history are aligned with the state.
Yes, sir.
And we haven't gotten back to the pre-COVID levels.
We
yet.
haven't gotten back yet, that's correct. But I do, if we get, let me actually move on to the next slide and I'll show you. This is the percent of students scoring C or higher. So not the pass rate, but those kids, and for pass rate and C or higher is like comparing the approaches kids in SC Ready to those who are meeting standard, right? So C or higher, if you look at the rate of recovery for biology and algebra, it's quite a bit steeper here on this. I don't have these data for the state, but it's jumping up a good bit there.
Dr. Phillips,
Yes, ma'am.
just for clarification, you're talking about C or higher
On the
based
exam.
on the test score, not
Yes.
on the grades that teachers
Correct,
gave.
on the exam itself, not in the course, not in the
Thank you.
course.
So that's a state standard,
Yes,
not a
Yes.
classroom standard.
exactly.
Correct, based on
Thank
the scale score of the state test. Oops, I went really fast there, I'm sorry. So the next slide here is, we're going to start talking about rigorous coursework. So we also track within the district the enrollment of our students in honors, AP, IB, and/or dual credit coursework. Because what we'd like to see is everyone to have access to that high-level coursework and that rigor. So this represents the percent of our students enrolled in one or more rigorous courses over time. And you can see it hovers right there around half of our kids, about half, take one or more rigorous courses. And that's anything from honors all the way up to IB. So that's pretty stable. This, when I was making this presentation, I had to actually go look and make sure I wasn't doing something wrong on this slide. Okay, so this is for last year, the number of rigorous courses per student. So again, about half didn't take any. Then we had about 38% of our students take 1 to 4. So that's, of the ones who take rigorous coursework, that's the majority. They take somewhere between 1 and 4 in a particular year. Then we had about 10% taking 5 to 7. And then we had, and I went and counted them, 126 students enrolled in 8 or more AP honors, IB, and/or dual enrollment courses last year. That's exhausting. I don't know how they did that. Like, you only get 8 courses in a year, so that's a lot. There were some with 10, so I thought that was pretty impressive. Okay, the ready to work measure. We also test 11th grade students and some 12th grade if they missed it the year before, students each year on a work readiness test. So this test can provide students with a portable work readiness credential that certifies that they're qualified for a certain percentage of profiled jobs from the assessment. Last year was a bit of a unique year. The state was in a contract dispute with ACT. So in the fall, we gave students the WIN test, the test we had been given for the past few years. And in the spring, they took the ACT work keys. So the kids who tested in the fall took a completely different test than the kids who tested in the spring. The data I'm showing here, they all get a certificate based on that, depending on their scores. But what I'm showing you here is a combination of those two tests. So the credentials are described in terms of color. So bronze, silver, gold, or platinum. Silver is sort of the breaking point for what we would like to see, silver or higher. This is the percentage of students receiving a silver or higher percentage over the past few years. You can see that we had a pretty significant drop here of about 15 points over 2021. The state experienced a somewhat similar drop of about 10 points. Ours was a little bigger. We still have a higher percentage than the state, but our drop was a little bit higher. We are looking into the reasons behind this. It is a test that is made up of ELA, math, gathering and interpreting information, sorts of domains. And so what we may be seeing here are similar effects of the learning loss from COVID. So this is our distribution of scores. So about 15% of our students didn't receive any certificate at all. And then you can see how the rest are distributed. Just so that you know what silver or higher means, a silver certificate indicates that a student has the prerequisite skills for about 69% of profile jobs that are included in the test. As you go up, it becomes 93 at gold and then 99 at platinum. So you can see there that about, what is that? What did I say here? 60 some odd % of our students are qualified for at least 69% of those jobs that are profiled on the test. Next is attendance. So what I've shown here on the left-hand side in blue is the attendance rate, the average daily attendance for the 2020-2021 school year. And in purple there, it's the 21-22 school year. Now you can see there's at elementary, middle, and high school that those values are quite a bit lower in some cases. I would like to point out that we're not really comparing apples to apples on this because in the 2020-2021 school year in the fall, we were half the time, more than half the time, we were virtual. And so attendance was calculated quite a bit differently at that point. Teacher attendance is on the right. It has stayed right in the 93, 94, 95 range. And we only have 2 years of that, incidentally, because we have started collecting that for the state report card. Okay, now we'll talk about graduation rate. Here is our graduation rate over time. You can see that it hovers right around the 90% mark. We did have a slight drop, about 1.8 points last year, from 90 to 88.2%. When we look at how that is broken out, of course, the 88.2 are on-time, 4-year graduates. The little sliver there are our students who graduated with a certificate of completion. And then the 10.1% are our non-graduates. I'm going to take this opportunity to get back on my soapbox about the importance of emphasizing a success rate for all our students. The 4-year graduation rate is a federal requirement that states report. And I don't think it often paints the right picture for the success of our students. I feel like it's important for any student who completes a study, a course of study, to have that acknowledged. And I think there's a little bit of good news on that front. The state, in the new accountability system, is going to be reporting a 5-year success rate. A while back, they did a 5-year graduation rate, but now they're going to include the 5-year graduation rate and a GED completion on the report card as well. They're also going to be tracking and reporting students on track to graduate on time, which will encourage our schools to track and continue to track and monitor that and intervene when necessary. Okay, this year we changed our interim assessment to a product called iReady for grades K through 8. This is a formative interim assessment that's aligned to South Carolina state standards. It includes standard-aligned instructional resources, so teachers can use this assessment along with other data points to inform their instruction. It also has a growth measure that'll help us work toward the state's new growth measure in the accountability model. So the following slides are going to detail our first administration of iReady this fall and serve as a baseline moving forward. Okay, so one of the reports they provide for us at the beginning of the year report number of students at risk for Tier 3. And we can think of this in terms of interventions. So we had about 15% at risk for Tier 3 intervention. Tier 2 was 12%? Yep. And then 72% for Tier 1 in reading. And then at math, it was 14, 14, and 72.
Dr. Phillips, I think
Yes.
this slide is a little different than the one the board members
It
have in their
is. I
packet. Will
pulled
you
this
explain?
directly from iReady this afternoon to make sure we had the most current data. This is directly from the iReady report.
And while you're interrupted,
That's
will you please explain for those tuning in who may not know the differences among Tier 1, Tier
Sure.
2, and Tier 3?
So
Thank you.
for the beginning of the year measure, what we're looking at here on Tier 1 or Tier 3 are those students who are 3 or more grade levels below their current grade level, who scored at a level that's 3 or more grade levels below. Tier 2 is 2 or more grade levels below. And Tier 1 includes students who are performing on or above grade level and students who are 1 grade level below. And so the reason those 1 grade level below students are included in that Tier 1 group is because we are at the very beginning of the year, and these kids are being tested on the current grade level stuff. So there's a little bit of wiggle room. As you move forward in the year, they're expected to know more, and therefore the middle of the year look at this will be a little bit different. It will shift those one year below grade levels will go down to that Tier 2 once we take the middle of the year test.
So by that same extrapolation, would a Tier 3 not really be 3 years behind, but 2 years behind?
Not necessarily, no, sir. It would depend on their scale score.
I mean, really?
All right, here is the distribution by grade level. And I put this up here mainly for patterns. So at the top, we're looking at reading across grade levels. And at the bottom, we're looking at math. And you can recognize on the math piece that the Tier 3, if we look at that top piece, those are those kids who are performing at the lowest level there. That tends to grow as you go up in grade, similar to what we saw in SC Ready. And it does the same for ELA a little bit, but it's not quite as pronounced. There's some ups and downs. For example, in 4th grade there's actually a little bump up for the students who are in that Tier 1. This is how we did compared to the state and nation on this assessment, and how we did compared to the national norm, which was completed in 2018-19 school year in the fall. In each of reading and math, we outperformed both the state and the nation year to date. We are a little bit behind the national norm, which would be pre-COVID in math. I'm looking mainly at those top 2 green boxes, those students performing at or above grade level. So you can see there that we are better than the state and nation year to date in both of those. But we have not approached pre-COVID quite yet in math.
And again, this is based upon assessments that were done this fall.
Yes, sir. We finished them just recently, yes, sir.
Except for the national norm.
Except for the national norm, which was done in fall of 1819. But the year-to-date is those scores completed nationwide up to the point where we stopped testing.
And this is a new tool we're using, so we don't have.
That's
Okay.
correct. Yes,
But
sir.
you could extrapolate that probably Lexington has approached the national rate since the COVID pandemic, whereas 3 or 5 years ago, it maybe would have looked different.
Yes, sir. It almost certainly would have. It is a new
Gotcha.
tool. We didn't get these data from the last assessment we were using, the STAR assessment. Excuse me. I mean, I'm very happy that we get these data now because it does give us that look at comparatively how we do with other students around the nation.
Which again, I mean, I think that overall theme, what makes Lexington One special is the degree of instruction. So when kids weren't engaged as much, it makes sense that the Lexington One uniqueness is not as prominent,
So we really want to make the very best use of this tool to grow our students and to see these results, not only on the state test, but in, eventually in graduation rate and in the proficiency of our students in ELA math and everything else. In a few minutes, when Dr. Postlethwaite talks about our near-term priorities, you're going to see language around this goal. And I wanted to just take a second and talk to you about the goal that we're setting on iReady in order to push our students up the curve and get them prepared for not only those state tests, but for graduating as proficient citizens. So the goal itself reads like this. The median % of typical growth target met will be greater than 100, and at least 40% of students will meet stretch growth. Let me start by explaining the difference between typical growth and stretch growth. Typical growth is the median value that a student who makes 1 year's growth makes. Okay? So it's essentially 1 year's growth. Well, in the state's new accountability model, 1 year's growth for students who are performing at the lowest end of things is not going to be enough to get them proficient. So iReady provides a stretch growth. Stretch growth is that amount of growth that a student needs to make to move up the curve. And all of these growth targets are relative to their starting point. So a student who starts lower on the scale is going to have to grow more for typical growth and more for stretch growth. Whereas a kid on the very upper end of the scale, typical growth may actually be like 5 point, or be 0. Like they may typically grow no points at all on that end of the scale, but in order to maintain and push forward, they need to make, say, 5 points. So it's relative to their starting point. So I've prepared this little illustration. We can kind of go through this quickly. So imagine that this is an entire school of 5 students. So the first student, Angelica, has a typical growth target of 5 and a stretch growth target of 10. And her observed growth is 11. And you can see all the way down to poor little Shane, who had 10 points for his typical growth target and 20 points for his stretch growth target, but only made 4 points of growth. Okay? So when we look at how that pans out, if the observed growth for Angelica was 11 points and the typical growth target was 5 points, then obviously she exceeded that typical growth, and so the percent of the typical growth met was actually 220%. And she met her stretch growth. Same thing with Charlie there, who doubled his typical growth target. So he met 200% of that growth target and met his stretch growth. Our next guy, Cedric, exceeded his typical growth target by 1 point. His typical growth target was 10, he made 11, that's 110% of that typical target. But he did not meet his stretch growth target of 20. And then on down the line, down to poor Shane, who really was struggling and made 40% of his typical growth and did not meet his stretch growth. But if we look at this now as the school, the median value of the typical percent of the target met, the middle value there is 110%, and 2 out of 5 met their stretch growth. Therefore, we would have, in this particular school of 5 students, met that target that we've set at the top. Does that make sense? Okay, good. Okay. I think I've taken up enough of your time at this point. Can I answer any questions for you? I see
Thank
Ms.
you,
Henson.
Dr. Phillips, for all of this information. My thoughts, questions might be more appropriate, Dr. Postlethwaite, during, when we get to the priorities. So if it is, just tell me and we can wait till then. While the data is great, practically speaking though, what does this look like in our schools? Like, okay, so we have Algebra 1 decreasing, so what are we doing? How are we gonna fix that? Could we see this Lexington 1 pass rate over time broken down by school? Can we see schools that are being successful? Can we see specific teachers that are being successful? If Gilbert's really striving in an area, could they help out Beechwood? Do you see what I'm saying with like
Yes, ma'am.
Algebra 1 or whatever it might be? Like, data's great, now what?
So actually, Ms. Gaskins and I were actually discussing this afternoon. So I'm going to actually defer to her for just a second on this, because I could answer, but I might be wrong.
I'm sure he would be right. So each of our schools has a very targeted action plan specific to their school data. And Dr. Phillips and his team have developed a very robust dashboard for schools to use. And just recently, we've been able to introduce a teacher dashboard so teachers have access to as much data as possible. So they understand their school-specific data and are working with the instructional team to target the interventions that we will be implementing at each school.
And that's one of the things we'd like to do. We're suggesting a board workshop just around what's next. This is sort of the what, but now what, and so what, right? And so we are suggesting a board workshop, and at that workshop, we would anticipate having 1 or 2 principals there simply to share with you what their data plan looks like. But every school has a data plan around these targets. Has an action plan, I should say, around these targets.
I just have a couple of questions, but
Yes, ma'am.
I just would like to say to the board as well, every year that I've been on this board, I've sent an email saying that this is data that we need to be reviewing. This is part of the strategic plan that we should be involved in. And every year we have not done that. So I have a couple questions for you, Dr. Phillips. You said we only have 2 years of the daily attendance for teachers because that's when we started collecting for the state report card. So is that not something that the district kept prior to
So
2023?
that's where I get it. The state sends, we get a district teacher attendance survey tool from the state now, and that started last year. I'm sure they do keep that. I have not had access to that, but as the accountability officer for the district, now I get that data for accountability through that survey tool, and that's where I received that data from this year. It's completed by, I believe HR does that, and is calculated in that tool for the accountability system.
Okay. And in the graduation rate, why was 2019, 2020 not included in there?
I took 2019, 2020 out of
Out of
everything.
everything?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I was just curious how we fell in there. Okay.
I
Thank
can
you
go
so-
back and find that for you. I'd be happy to provide that for you.
Okay, thank you so much, I appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am.
You know, if we boil the ocean a little bit, you know, the headlines typically read, South Carolina's last in education or near the bottom in education. And so when we see Lexington One performing higher than state standards, then that makes you feel better, but then it makes you kind of wonder, well, how do we stack up if we're the best of the last? Okay. As I look at the national data for iReady, it doesn't seem to paint that type of picture. Can you comment on how Lexington One stacks up nationally?
Simply based on the iReady data,
Simply based on that.
yeah, so again, this is our first time administering this test, K through 8. We did give it in math last year, and I don't have how we did nationally on that one, but based on this, I think it's clear that we hold our own with students taking the same test across the nation in both ELA and math. When we talk about students performing at or above grade level, I think when we're taking South Carolina being at the bottom out of the picture, what we're talking about now is essentially an apples to apples comparison. Students in the same grade, taking the same test at the same time across the country. We're doing as well as the nation or better. The one place I would say that we're struggling maybe a little bit even in that, maybe math, but just in terms of how it was prior to the pandemic. And so, you know, we can't ignore the pandemic. It obviously had an effect on the nation as well, but we have kept sort of our standing relative to the nation after the effects of that pandemic.
Yeah, that was sort of the inference I was taking from the bar graph, was that nationally, we seem to be on par with you know, accepted numbers, accepted standards. So I mean,
Grade 3 through 8.
great, yeah, exactly, on the 3 through 8. Okay, I just want to make sure I was
A
reading.
lot of the national stuff's based upon, you know, SAT and
Sure,
AP
sure.
And
all that.
NAEP,
Yeah, all
NAEP,
that.
yes, sir.
Graduation rates.
Right.
Others?
Thank you, Dr. Phillips.
Yes, ma'am, thank you.
May we move on to the next item? Speaking of stretch goals, you're probably ready for a stretch. So my presentation is shortened tonight so that we could give so much time to these important baseline outcomes. So I will start by just going over the other items that are in the packet that you received on the table tonight. The first is an organizational chart, and right behind it are the names that fit with the positions on that organizational chart. Behind that is the school directory. We know that a lot of constituents reach out to board members, and we wanted you to have the exact understanding of who handles what, so that you could refer constituents directly and let them get a fast response. If you ever find that there's someone who does not hear back from us within 48 hours, please ask them to contact my office, because we have actually a desired 24-hour response. Sometimes it takes us 48 hours if there's something unusual going on. Behind that, you have the second draft of the near-term priorities. You saw the first 2 pages are just a summary, but behind the first 2 pages on these really long pages, you find the detail of the 45-day and the 90-day deliverables. And then in the third column in black or red font are the outcomes. How will we know if this plan is working? Behind that, you have lots of pages of the summary feedback that we received, so that you'll know what you said and the major themes from the other representative groups with whom we met. Finally, there's just a page that accompanies an out-of-district trip for tonight. We don't want to talk about these 45 and 90-day deliverables tonight, but we do want to cover particularly the student academic and the student behavioral and well-being sections when we meet for a workshop session. So on the second slide, thank you, you'll see a slide you've seen many times before, and we'll continue to see it as it sort of sets the direction for us. The board focus is on setting impactful strategic goals, not just in academics, the arts, athletics, extracurricular activities, but also in areas such as safety and well-being, the operational parts of the organization. You'll hear from Mr. Warren tonight on a facilities report. The financial part, you'll hear a bit from Mrs. Miller tonight about how we're going to report on financials going forward. And then, of course, you have HR, strategic goals, and communication strategic goals. So it isn't just academics, but our core business is about the growth of student well-being and academic progress. The staff focus then is implementing these strategic priorities that the board will identify for the next year by year over 5 years, and addressing the day-to-day operations, which makes the referral of constituent concerns to us important so that we can deal with those expediently. In large part, those 45 and 90-day plans focus on some process goals, because during COVID, I don't know if hospitals were like this, but I imagine that you had to convert a lot of spaces to serve patients in different ways than you were accustomed to. The same thing happened in school districts. We had to convert a lot of our energies and efforts to serve students. It was all hands on deck to keep the system running. So in many of our different departments, it's time now to get back to examining the protocols, reminding people of how we operate under normal times, and making sure that the compliance issues we may have had to slight during COVID are once again implemented with fidelity. As we think about performance targets, that's on the next two slides. The one is just a placeholder slide. If you could advance a slide or two, thank you. Again, we're going to take a look at the annual growth and makeup growth. You've seen this slide before. It should begin to make more sense, and perhaps even greater sense if you're able to attend a November 9th session with principals that will be presented by the head of the Education Oversight Committee and his statistician, that really explain how we think about this makeup growth or stretch growth that has to happen. We have to make sure that now we're saying at least 40% of our students, but year by year we've got to move that percentage up. We just tried to start with something that was realistic. We originally suggested 50%, but given that the national norm is barely 40% for stretch growth, feedback from our teachers and principals was to dial that back and not create unrealistic expectations, particularly in the first year. On the next slide, we simply lay out again the strategies that you prioritized for this year. These are our, if we can advance another slide. Thank you for multitasking for me, Josh. These are the priorities that we laid out initially after we had some early feedback. The first three are italicized and highlighted because those are the three goals that were shared on July 27th with everyone who attended, leading as one. So we want to be consistent throughout this year on focusing intently on those three goals. I like to think of it as a gentle pressure applied relentlessly to get us back on track over and over and over. When we met with teachers a couple weeks ago to talk about their primary problems of practice, on the next slide we see what teachers identified. They met in this room, they met in small groups, named a number of different problems of practice, and then those sticky dots represent the votes of all the teachers as they circulated around the room. But I'd like to call your attention to their top three worries. One is student and adult. They're talking about social and emotional well-being. In order for us to be more specific about that, we're using the terms behavioral and mental health because that is more succinct in terms of conveying what it is we would work on. But I like the way they've drawn that cycle at the top. If students come in having experienced some sort of trauma or perhaps going a couple of years without good structure that would be developmentally sound for them, they exhibit behaviors that are disruptive in the classroom. That is described by teachers as a lack of discipline because it's disrupting their ability to teach everyone. And then that, unless it's addressed, creates additional trauma that impacts the adults and other students. So they're talking about this vicious cycle that we're in and emphasizing the need to really address the behaviors of children who are keeping the teacher from being able to teach and other students from being able to learn. And that doesn't mean removing them so that they don't get any services. It's making sure they get the appropriate services that help them without hurting others. And then, of course, they mentioned teacher retention, and they mentioned the working conditions as a key component in teacher retention, as well, of course, as salary. But working conditions are a huge concern to educators these days. And then finally, what I think the board has been saying all along, morale, the fact that the teaching profession, the education profession used to be hugely respected and admired. And now, many times, teachers take the brunt, not only from students who are coming to school with a lot of needs, but from their parents who assume from the outset, some parents who assume from the outset their child was right and the educator was wrong. And that really places a different kind of stressor on teachers. So finally, on my final couple slides, we just want to talk about the next steps. We really have to focus on the indicators of student success. As you looked at, to your point, Mrs. Henson, as we looked at those results, so what? Where would we expect to be when we look at these and other data at the end of this year? And then sometimes we're going to have to look at outputs. They aren't yet the outcomes. They're the process pieces that simply have to be put back in place in order to make sure that our system is running effectively. We talked about the fact that those high-level, the 90-day evidence of progress are ready for your review. We didn't want to get into that tonight. That's a lot of stuff, but we wanted to give it to you tonight so that you would have it and have at least a couple weeks to look at it before we come back to it in a workshop setting. Our next steps would be to set a date for the board workshop and also to get, again, principal, teacher, student, parent, and support staff feedback. That my time is up. So the last slide we've seen many times. It's from Jim Collins's book that we might want to look at. It's a tiny little monograph called Good to Great for the Social Sectors, about how those of us who work in the nonprofit sector can set reasonable outcome goals. So again, he emphasizes that systems as complex as ours that serve the public will not improve unless sitting at this table and in this room and at the school leadership and classroom leadership positions, we don't have disciplined people with disciplined thought taking disciplined action. So that's our intent. We hope that the board will join with us in applying to our own discipline gentle pressure about sticking to the main thing. So thank you for listening to us tonight. We just, as part of the superintendent's report, have one more quick section from Mr. Warren. Mr. Warren?
Madam Chair, Dr. Postlewaite, members of the board, thank you for the opportunity tonight to present on the Capitol Building Program. I wanted to open tonight to share that at the direction of Dr. Postlewaite, moving forward with our new projects, we will be providing executive summaries at the board meetings. So I look forward to providing those to you with the collaboration with our contractors and design firms. So that will Begin with our addition at Forts Pond Elementary School that is about to be underway, and then also subsequently Elementary School number 19 in the White Knoll attendance area. Starting tonight, at Gilbert High School, the athletic and fine arts addition are nearing completion. Final inspection for these spaces is set for October the 27th, so just a couple weeks. I was out there today and just tying up some loose ends and some punch list items, getting that project completed and ready for inspection. Marry up perfectly with winter sports. Obviously, wrestling starts right at the 1st of November for the wrestling space. And then performance seasons. There will still be some IT, some lighting items to wrap up post-inspection, but we're working to complete those in the very near future. Moving inside the space, you'll see the beautiful space that will be a showpiece in Gilbert for years to come. This is an 800-seat theater. It will be a state-of-the-art facility for our students and staff to thrive in. We were very intentional here with the carpet. You see, we have the Gilbert red tied in there within the space, and it looks really, really good with the seats and sound panels in that theater. So really excited about how that's turning out, and just can't wait to see it in use. Moving to the athletic addition, weight room is completed, wrestling room spaces. I want to point out here, right to the left here in this photo, these are 2 bay doors that open up right outside to a covered canopy for students to go outside to complete their physical activities. Racks are installed in the weight room. All the weight equipment's right back here, ready to be set up and used as soon as we get that CO, occupancy certificate. And on the right side here, you see the wrestling room. The concrete is stained. All the wrestling pads are right, the mats are right here, ready to go down on this floor and be used right here at the start of November. Staying in Gilbert, America, I wanted to present the completed track renovations. We expanded this track from 6 lanes to 8 lanes, also resurfaced it, restriped it, put up some new fencing, provides a uniform appearance. This renovation to this track facility will allow Gilbert to host region competitions and other events that they couldn't previously because of having a 6-lane track. Very proud of our design and construction teams here for this project, completed well before track season for next year. On to the new transportation facility located on 2 Notch Road. You see the framing here in the shop and wash bay area. Also on the right here, you see the gypsum board is installed. Soon after that, you'll see the vapor barrier go up and then the brick and metal siding. So that'll be occurring here soon. The plan for this project is to begin paving asphalt the majority of this site up here past the office building and back down towards 20. Final site work is being completed, prepared for paving, curb and gutters installed, and then to the right here, this will be a large meeting space for drivers and staff to train and have meetings. We've ordered furniture to avoid any kind of major lead time issues here, continuing to work towards a winter completion. Moving inside the facility, metal studs are going up, prepare for sheetrock, hollow metal door frames. You see on the right, looking down one of the corridors that will lead into the office spaces for staff. Also, you're looking out the front here. This will be the front entry area, and then there'll be some walls here providing more office space inside this room. So looking forward to seeing more. Meadow Glen Middle School, last 2 projects here. We have 2 storage buildings. Here's the one we completed for Meadow Glen Middle. You see, once again, that'll be a great space for outdoor equipment, custodial items to hopefully allow us to remove some connexes from some of our campuses. In the New Providence Elementary School, their building is complete there as well. And always you can track our progress on our building plan website. Questions?
Well, I've got just one question looking at that. Why were the storage buildings at the Meadow Glen area brick, but the one at New Providence was not?
Just working to stay within budget and scope. Just, so we have that situation in several different schools in our district. But we have brick and metal buildings.
Okay, thank you.
And you're going to get tired of me saying this, but another word of thanks. It is impressive the amount of traffic that has come off the road since Lakeside was built. Again, for someone that drives up and down 378 every day, it's much more pleasant.
Yep.
Well, and it was great today. I drove across town at 12:45, and because the I-20 bridge or exit ramp was closed, all that traffic was being sent up 378 and down 6 and back around. And so basically all of Lexington County was driving in front of Lakeside or North Lake Community Learning Center. And so I can't imagine if all the students were there. But
Yep. Thank you.
anything else, Dr. Postlewaite? No. All right, now we are on to citizens' participation. Let me turn my page real quick. All right, Lexington County School District One's Board of Trustees solicits the advice and counsel of its citizens. To encourage this participation, the board provides a citizens' participation period during board meetings. In order to speak, you must be the parent or legal guardian of a student currently attending Lexington District 1 school, a taxpayer residing in the Lexington District 1 attendance area, an employee of the district, or a student currently attending a Lexington District 1 school. You may comment on agenda items, school operations, policies, or programs. You may not speak about or name specific individuals, whether students or school or district staff. Failure to follow this rule will result in immediate loss of the opportunity to speak. We want to remind you that this meeting is being live streamed and that the recording of this meeting will be part of the public record in perpetuity. We want to give everyone who came tonight an opportunity to speak, and in order to do that, I will recognize you and call you by name and ask you to approach the lectern at the back of the room where Mrs. Hilton is waiting. The board will not reply to your remarks or take any action during the board meeting in response to your comments or questions. You may address the board for up to 3 minutes. If you have any handouts that you would like for the board to review, please give them to Ms. Halliday in the back of the room, and she'll distribute them. Do not make any clap or make any comments either while an individual speaks or after he or she finishes. You received a card tonight. The card asks for your name, address, and other information. However, I will only read out your name, the town you reside in, and that's it. If you're unable to attend the meeting this evening or are uncomfortable addressing the board in person, you may reach out to the board by email, telephone, or mail, and our contact information is available on the Lexington District 1 website. We welcome all messages. And now, Mrs. Hilton lives in Lexington and wants to speak just about general education matters.
Well, as you can tell, I'm not a parent with a student in school right now, but I am a concerned grandparent. My name is Shirley Hilton. My husband and I have one daughter who is 33 and who attended Lexington Elementary, Middle, and Lexington High School. We were very pleased with the education she received from 1st through 12th grade and felt that it prepared her well to move on to college and a good job. We now have a preschool granddaughter who will hopefully be able to attend one of the Lexington District elementary schools in a couple of years. We say hopefully because we continue to be extremely concerned about the state of public education that we keep hearing about across our United States. When we have voiced our concerns to local teachers, to librarians, district staff, and some parents, the reply we have most often heard as grandparents is, but this is Lexington. We can't imagine any of that ever happening here in our district. But we also know parents who have already experienced quite the opposite. No homework or grades brought home. Students told not to mention the accelerated classes that they are in so as not to offend other students. Some lowering requirements for all students to adjust to the lowest common denominator. Reading assignments that promote the idea that our country is repressive, racist, and that our founders are evil. We are aware that the school day is very limited in what information can be shared effectively with our children, and it is our belief as grandparents in our home that the focus should be on the basics that prepare them for life after high school, whether that's a job in the military or whether they go on to college. We shouldn't be graduating students who cannot read and write, do basic math, or speak good English. We personally continue to encounter teens who can't even make change without the cash register instructing them or their phone calculating it for them. I have personally taught children in our Sunday school, church Sunday school, who in the 5th and 6th grade level have had trouble with reading basic sentences or speaking basic English. We know we have a new superintendent for our district, and it is our hope that Dr. Postlethwaite's focus and the board's will be on assuring that the education our district has long been known for will continue to reach even higher levels of excellence. And I am encouraged by some of the information I've heard tonight. But I can assure, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hilton. Next, we have Ms. Dana Holmesley. She lives in Lexington and wants to speak about board communication and responsibility.
Good evening. It's good to finally be able to come before you all publicly and speak here today. It's been 55 days since we have had the opportunity to have citizens' participation. At the August 23rd, 2022 board meeting, I spoke about finances and procurement, asking you to please consider an audit here in Lexington One. I also gave each of you a handout with information on my findings through information request and research. Once again, I would like to ask you all, after hearing no response through email, to please consider a more comprehensive and thorough audit like they are currently doing in Lexington-Richland District 5. The current annual sample audits are insufficient to address concerns. There are a lot of unanswered questions, and your constituents and taxpayers deserve answers. Our students, teachers, and staff deserve to be in a district that gives them the best possible outcome and resources to succeed. Let's try to rebuild and restore the trust between this board and the community that has been eroding for some time now. I would also like to go on record and say that I've requested information after the September 27th board meeting that still has not been provided to the public. As a reminder, information provided to the board at public meetings is by state law a public record as soon as it is presented to the board, and the law allows the public to copy and inspect this record during normal business hours without paying a fee or filing a formal records request. By law, I can come into the district and view records at any time. This record I have been requesting since it was presented to the board on September 27th is the public feedback packet for the superintendent search. To date, I have sent numerous emails following up with this board and only hearing back consistently from one board member, to which they were also given vague information on the date of availability of this information by the attorney. Please prioritize communication and respond to citizens who elected you when they reach out with their questions, requests for information, or concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Holmesley. Next, we have Ms. Lee Sue Kim. She lives in Lexington and wants to speak about DECA finance issue.
Yeah, I have been a DECA parent for many years and have spoken highly of the club. It wasn't until I began advocating for funding for our DECA advisors that I was informed that Perkin Grant funding club activities and covering a major part of competition expenses. The school year of 2021-2022 was the very first time that inequality and inequity have been created among the DECA students and the families by charging differentiated fees for students and who participated in the same activity, rode the same bus, and shared the same hotel room. I have exhausted the means to get a satisfactory response from the district and the board about the request for refunding the overcharged payments to DECA parents and the request that the school and the district provide the breakdown costs for the DECA conference. Since June, no one has provided the policy to drive this practice that resulted in charging other students significantly higher rate. Since the grant funds was used as an award as first and second place as claimed by the school, someone should be able to produce the breakdown amount for every single parent. I have received inconsistent statements about what the grant covered. For example, in one email I was told the grant covered $11,000 transportation fee, but based on all the invoices from the charter bus company, the transportation was $4,090. I was also told the grant did not cover registration fee. However, the FOIA document indicated that students' registration was 100% covered. On another school request, and the fees were paid for with the student activity funds, booster club funds, cadet command, and individual responsibilities. It did not mention Perkins grant at all. However, after the board approved the request, the school used the grant money to pay for some of the costs and turn around charged some students other fees. In addition, on the PR, the hotel was hired. Later, SC students was reassigned to Hilton. According to the registration guide, the hotel rate for Hilton is lower than Hyatt. Both hotel rates were lower than the amount quoted on the PR and the PO. These are the many examples and like this. There are two restaurant charges. One was $550 and the other was $150 for 19 students out of 48 competing students were paid from the account for the fees paid by the students. This has made me wonder if some competing students had to pay for some other students' meal. The issue is beyond the requested refund. I'm respectfully making the appeal to the board for refunding all the DECA students and families that were overcharged for the ICDC trip, investigating of mishandling the federal grant, parking grant, and an explanation as to why the district used a travel agency which resulted in paying more than the DECA conference rate. To be clear, I have no objection for the first and second place winners getting awarded if the award is governed, allowed by the state, federal parking regulation, policy, guidelines, and the policy itself is transparent.
Thank you, Ms. Kim.
Thank you. I'm going to send this to all the board members tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we are moving on to item 11.0, and that is first reading of policy BDR, organization of the board. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Guyton, the chair of our ad hoc committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In your packet, you will find the discussed BD and BD-R for your review. So discussion, to give you some insight around a discussion within the committee itself. If we look at BD draft 21, you'll see in the first paragraph, essentially this is, the rewording is to come in alignment with the seating of new board members, which we'll in part have discussed before regarding policy BBB. So this is essentially a continuation of that. Secondly, you will see that there was some discussion regarding election of officers, and that really just the simple term secret was just a difficult thing for the committee to use within the code itself, and so we eliminated the term secret and just basically following Robert's rules. Your elections of officers are followed by ballot unless there's a board member request that there be a roll call vote, and in which time that would ensue. Moving on, one additional item that was added, candidates will, with new board members coming on, there was consideration for oftentimes the new board members in one of their first elections or one of their first meetings will be electing board officers. And so as such, those who have been nominated for board officer will have a chance to briefly address the board. Again, this is the term being brief. This is not meant to be a stump speech or dissertation, but just a little more kind of vision casting, a little get to know you kind of thing. Moving on, and this is philosophically where we as a board need to have discussion. So you will see there's an optional part at the bottom, disciplinary action of board members. And there seems to be inconsistency across the board from district to district as to how there's an internal handling of disciplinary action of board members. Obviously, we know that state statute provides the only person who can reach into the district and remove a board officer rests with the officer of the governor. However, there was thought, concern, conversation regarding that sometimes if a board member's behavior becomes so egregious that the board itself needs to, in some way, distance itself from the board member, what would that look like? Are there corrective actions that can occur? Referencing the above, since the board, if one of those people who had an egregious behavior happened to be a board officer, since there is a way in which the board places someone in that position, there should be consideration for the possibility of removing somebody from that position. And so we have no mechanism for that. This language comes out of similar language in other districts that have elected to adopt these type of procedures. It leaves a lot of question marks. You know, I know no other way to put it, in that ultimately the power to remove a board member rests with the governor and then with the next election, quite frankly. And so should it stop there, or should the board itself have the ability to not remove a board member, but a mechanism by which the board distance itself from the behaviors of a board member that would be considered to be egregious? And if so, what does that look like? So I'm going to leave that open for discussion. Again, it's an optional, so that's why we placed it in there. And so we would, as a committee, would be interested in hearing the conversation of the board.
Go ahead, Ms. Garris.
You can go ahead.
My thoughts, this just, I read it and I'm reading it again now, and your explanation, I appreciate the thoughtfulness that y'all put into this and the research that you did. And I do understand that it's kind of all over the place around the state. What I would say is that the boards who live in this, I guess, disciplinary world within their board, it's just constantly them airing their dirty laundry in their board meetings rather than conducting the business of the district. And I think that just becomes the inner board politics and disagreements become a distraction from what the board is supposed to be doing and what they were elected to do. And so and this multi-step, I understand this, but sometimes I'm very torn about this because I can recognize that there is a need for it, but as you said, really, the governor has a role in criminal behavior.
Mm-hmm.
But beyond that, accountability belongs to the voters.
Correct.
And I don't know that there's the last statement about rights afforded to the board under applicable state law. There are none. We are each individually, we serve as a board, and our responsibility is to speak with one voice, but we're each individually elected. And so there's really not a mechanism or a capability within state law for us to police each other. And I'm not sure if even getting into the weeds on this is a good use of our time. I mean, I appreciate y'all putting that out, but I just think that we have our own individual responsibility and our own individual ethics and our own individual requirements to comply with law. And beyond that, I'm not sure what the role of the board is to discipline other board members. So those are my thoughts.
And to expound on that, I think, one, I wouldn't call it a rebuttal, but one point of consideration would be that, yes, the power does rest with both the governor and the citizenship, if you will. However, 4 years can be very long. And so if a board member in year one is displaying significantly egregious behavior, that can, the 4 year, it's another 3 years until the community can weigh in on that. And so, just a point of consideration.
Well, and that's the funny thing about a school board. Unlike the legislature or any other real organization, we're a team, but we don't get to pick our team members. The voters get to pick our team members. And I think they expect us to get along, or at least get along for the purpose of serving students. And so anything that brings, you're right, it could be egregious behavior at day one. And we're seeing that in boards around the state. And so I don't know that a public censure makes that better. I think maybe it just throws a match on the fire. So I don't really know. I'm going to let other comments then.
So you mentioned accountability belongs to the voters. And in this case, we have some language in here about removal of board officers. Well, in that case, we would be the voters. And I feel as if we need a way to remove board officers. And up here in the second sentence, it says, the board recognizes that its failure to deal with deliberate or continuing violations of its policies risk the loss of public confidence in the board's ability to govern effectively, which is the very reason why we need this policy. So I don't believe adding this into a policy would cause any more dysfunction than there already is. It would actually give us a way to deal with deliberate and continuing violations of our policies. So I believe we do need a way to remove board officers, and that can be done through a majority vote. That can be done by installing a new officer, then essentially ending that officer's term. And the word in here is possible removable by the board from any leadership or committee positions. 3 strikes you're out. That's step 3 in here. Just go ahead and remove them. However that may look. And step 1 is, I guess I'm not going to go into the steps because to me this applies more to board officers than it does board members, because the governor has a way to remove board members if needed. But I do believe we do need a way to remove board officers when they have not fulfilled their duties.
And there was, again, to comment on that, there was discussion regarding within the committee, is there a need to differentiate the board officer versus the board member role? And since, to that point, we as a board elect a slate of board officers, and so there's a process by which you instill them into that position. Vice versa, if there becomes egregious behavior, is this necessarily the person that you want representing the board in these roles? And so we have under current policy, we have no mechanism by which to reverse that decision on behalf of the board. And so there was discussion by the committee that, that could be the simple carve-out, that you simply address board officers, you do not address board members. However, we wanted to give to the board itself the totality of the language to demonstrate at least that there are ways in which the board can distance itself from its own members. However, we were not necessarily in agreement, I won't say that. I will say that we were looking for more direction from the board into, were you not interested at all? Were you interested in board officers, or were you interested in board members in general? And please correct me if I'm wrong, committee members, if I misspeak in any way on that. Or if y'all want to talk, please feel free to.
And I said I wasn't going to say anything else, but I'm going to say one more thing. And I understand what Ms. Garris is saying, and I agree with it being, these criteria being based on violation of policy. And in response to that, I would suggest that then this component of this policy wait until our policies are updated, the ones that, because we have some policies that are out of date. There may be something that one board member that's not an officer has done that violated policy, but then somebody else but that policy is not really enforced, but then this policy is enforced, and so, right, I think, I don't know that we can, our policies are a little arbitrary right now, and so maybe using that as the measuring stick for this is not the, maybe this needs to wait until the policies are sound.
And so, in an appreciation of time, well, let me ask this, or any other comments from board members?
Tell them if they don't have any comments, you're leaving that paragraph in there.
I'm sorry?
I said, just say if they don't have any comments, you're leaving the whole paragraph in there, so then it doesn't get removed.
So what we will do is, again, this is a first reading, and so, again, you know, the way you think about it tonight may not be the way you think about it 3 days from now, and so I would just ask that any thoughts, comments, reservations that you may have, email me, and we can certainly take that in consideration. And then when it comes around to second reading, we can address, you know, what the optional language will look like at that point, if it's so decided to include it. Go ahead, I'm
I
sorry.
do have one more thing. I have one comment on BDR, but another comment on BD. I would like for each officer to serve a one-year term for several reasons, but one of those would actually help if you have a board officer who is deliberately and continually violating policy, then it's much easier to vote them out in a year than it is to bring some kind of process of removal in 2 years. And I also feel as if, and Kathy mentioned this in one of the ad hoc committee meetings, she said, when I came on the board, I really had no idea who I was voting for. So we have new members coming on who are going to be voting for officers. Well, 2-3 months from now, they may decide, this officer's not doing their job. They're not doing anything I thought they were going to do. But they're stuck with them for another, 19, 20 months until they can vote for someone different. Also, it doesn't give everyone the opportunity to be an officer of the board because you have officers every 2 years. You only have 2 elections. There's only 3 positions at each election, and there's 7 board members. So if everyone wanted the opportunity to serve in a leadership position, they may not necessarily be afforded that opportunity.
Sure. And there was discussion regarding that, and ultimately, it was a committee's recommendation to maintain it at a 2-year term, simply based off the thought that it does take a little bit of time to sort of get your feet under you as a board member. And so there's a period of seasoning that has to occur. And so it was felt that one just kind of felt a little short, and 2 felt about right, but even based off the election cycles and so on and so forth. So that was the thinking behind to which you've already to which you addressed. But certainly, again, will be taken into consideration. Moving on to
Dr. Guyton.
Go ahead.
Just going back to the 2-year thing, I still kind of stand by where we landed as the committee on the 2 years. But just like we've talked about with superintendent or board officers, having some form of like succession plan is also important. And so either keeping in mind when we vote for officers, making sure vice chair is someone who may be continuing on and ready to move into that role in 2 years, if we're not going to do the 1-year thing. A good way to think about it is if we did do 1 year, I'll just use names for example. Anne-Marie is chair. If she was going to be cycling off, but Mike was going to be staying on and he wanted to be chair, having that, someone training under that person is just really valuable so that, I mean, it could happen where you have only one person left on the board and that they've only had 2 years of experience, no officer position.
Well, and I think that's a great idea, but then there are elections, and you just can't predict what, I mean, there are districts all around the state that their board chair gets defeated, or you just don't ever know, because you don't ever know what happens in an election. So setting up a succession plan beyond 2 years is a little
But we
difficult.
serve 4-year terms, so.
Right, but yes.
That's why you do 1 year with a succession plan. And then there's nothing saying that even after 1 year, you can't be elected to a second year and a third year. There's no term limit on board officer positions. But I also feel as if every member should be trained to be an officer. Like, there should not be information sitting in front of one member in a meeting that all members don't have access to. And just say, if 3 officers were out, none of us have any experience, the remaining ones up here, in what needs to be done to be chair of the meeting or vice chair. So I think that needs to be part of new board member training as a whole, like how to be a board officer, board chair, how things are handled.
Well, we will certainly take those into consideration. And moving on to BD-R. So there actually was a little change here. This is one kind of in line with Ms. Henson's previous point about succession planning and the seasoning that can occur. One of the main changes you will see is that with duties of the vice chair, we have actually recommended to the board that consideration of that which would be typical for a parliamentarian to rest with the vice chair position. It really gives a little more depth and breadth to that position as opposed to kind of lying in wait, if you will. And so again, if this is someone who may go on to be the chair, it certainly would be nice to have, you know, a year or two of or possibly more of really getting into the weeds on parliamentary procedure and sort of being that parliamentarian for the board. Otherwise, the recommendations stayed the same from the draft. So that concludes our first reading. Again, any comments, questions, concerns you have, please feel free to email me that, and we will proceed from there.
I've already emailed you this, but I do want to put this on the record that I would just like a sentence to be added in that says, in the absence of the secretary, the board will elect a temporary secretary.
Okay, so noted.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Guyton. All right, moving on to action items. Do I hear a motion that the board approve the recommendation of 10 student travel requests?
Madam Chair, I move that the board approve the recommendation of 10 student travel requests. The travel requests were reviewed by administration and are in compliance with board policy.
Thank you, Ms. Henson. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Is there any discussion? Ms. Gaskins, is there anything that you would like to tell us about these travel requests?
So we've had time to review each, and you can see that there's some interesting trips before you tonight, including a trip to France. And so we're excited to be able to get back to a place where we can approve international travel.
It's very exciting. Any questions, board? All right. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion carries. All right. I'm going to get the motion. Well,
Yep.
we'll take these. We'll eat the elephant one bite at a time. All right. Do I hear a motion to approve the second reading of policy BDD, Board Superintendent Relationship?
Madam Chair, I move that the board approve the second reading of policy BDD, Board Superintendent Relationship.
Thank you, Dr. Guyton. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Oswald. All right, Dr. Guyton.
So regarding this, very little change from the original draft. There is some grammatical change that you will see. Recommend sound policy, this being under the superintendent. Recommend sound policy and enforce board policies by establishing operational regulations. That was essentially the main adjustment that was made.
All right. Board, do you have any questions for the committee or Dr. Guyton? All right. All in favor of policy BDD as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Do I hear a motion to approve the second reading of policy BG, BGD, and BG, BGDR, board policy process, board review of administrative rules?
Madam Chair, I move that the board approve the second reading of policy BG, BGD, and BGD, BGD-R, administrative rule for board policy process and board review of administrative rules.
Thank you, Dr. Guyton. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Oswald. All right, Dr. Guyton.
Specific to BG, BGD, some change regarding upon second review by the committee, review of administrative rules. The board may approve, amend, or nullify administrative rules upon recommendation from the superintendent. Secondly, regarding, again, just sort of fleshing out our policy review process by which an introduction occurs, first reading, second reading, so on. One notable change, and I'll draw your attention to the bottom of the second page, excuse me, make that third page. A comprehensive review of the policy manual will be conducted by the board in collaboration with the superintendent the year following the implementation of the strategic plan. The reason for this is that, number one, we were looking to eliminate the possibility of something from 1985 staying on the books. Secondly, we wanted to make sure that as a board and for future boards, that the policies are aligned with the strategic plan, which then, of course, aligns with the budget, which are the main roles and responsibilities of the board. We very much agree that the undertaking of a policy review, a comprehensive policy review, can be fairly taxing. However, it is of necessity. This does not eliminate the need and possibility of change of policies throughout that 5 years, but essentially every 5 years you're making sure and going through, and we're holding ourselves accountable to this policy as a board to make sure that we have updated policies in line with our current strategic plan.
Along that line, I would like to suggest that maybe that last bullet point with the comprehensive review after the strategic plan, that the sentence before it that you struck, that maybe it's just both, because I don't know, I mean, I don't want the policy to limit us to a review of policy after the strategic plan. I think there should also be an ongoing review in the event that legislation comes along or federal rules change or circumstances. I mean, I think that there should still be just an ongoing awareness that the policies should be under review at all. I think at all times. I think the board should be considering policy. And so I would suggest taking the sentence that y'all have added and just it's an addition to that sentence rather than a replacement.
The reason we discussed, or at least taking out the word supervise, is because it sounds odd to have someone supervising their supervisor. So like the board's policy, the superintendent will supervise a review of that.
I think that's referring to the policy manual coordinator that's mentioned in the paragraph at the top. So the superintendent, because that section starts with the superintendent or his designated policy manual coordinator has a responsibility of drafting policy. I think that supervision is not supervising the board. I think it's supervising the person the superintendent has designated like it used to be Mary Beth. She was the person that was responsible for supervising policy, just ongoing policy review. So I don't think it's supervising us. I think it's supervising that person within the administration.
Well, and I think to kind of flesh that out a little bit, take, for example, this exercise we're going through right now, a review of the B policies. It almost seems a little weird if the superintendent's kind of leading that up, because these policies are directly related to the behavior of the board and how the board governs itself. And so there's less of a role for the superintendent to supervise that aspect of it.
See, and I actually would, I understand what you're saying, because the board is responsible for policies, but the B policies apply to us. The rest
Correct.
are desk procedures for them.
Correct.
And so I think that the superintendent has to have their eye on the policies at all times, because if the F policies need to be updated because we have, some new financial regulation, or, I mean, I don't, we are ultimately responsible for them, but we don't own them alone.
Correct.
Right, and that's why we added I'm not being argumentative,
No,
I'm
me
hearing what you're
neither, me
saying.
neither, yeah.
But that's why we added, and I think the word might have even come from Dr. Postlewaite, in collaboration with the superintendent. In that clause.
And also to that point, it was addressed in second paragraph of, if you go to board policy, BGD, so if you go up a page, 2 pages, I'm sorry. The board regards policy development and review as an ongoing process. The need for a new policy or revision or deletion of an existing policy may arise from a change in law and/or regulations, modification, district, So
Yeah, like district visions and goals,
that
educational
sort
research.
of sets the table for, the expectation is that the superintendent and the district are consistently reviewing policy to make sure that there's alignment with legal statutes and current operations. The only reason that was added at the end was that, again, to create a hopeful avoidance of policies that linger.
Okay.
But to your point, if certainly if recommendation is for a change, motion vote, we can certainly go from there.
Yeah, and I guess my discussion, I think an additional bullet to similar where Chairman Green was going makes sense, because again, it also pulls in the expertise of SCSBA, which again is a state level entity that helps all of our districts, is important. So again, my suggestion would be to add it, the red is an add, not a substitution. So do I need to motion that?
No, I think this, for the second reading, I think this is just feedback to the,
Gotcha.
Well, this is for vote.
oh, you're right.
Yes.
Sorry, you're right. Lost track of which one we were
So Dr.
reviewing.
Powers, you're saying
So-
the sentence in black that has the strike through it,
Mhm.
keep that, click enter, have a bullet below it with the red font?
Yep, exactly.
I think the only consideration for that would be the district may seek the aid of SCSBA Policy Services to have agreement with the paragraph at the top. It says between South Carolina School Board Association's policy services and other sources of policy research information. So the only point of consideration there would be the addition of and other sources of policy research information. Because to that point, we have, as we've gone through policy, we have sometimes found that the South Carolina School Board Association may refer us to another attorney for additional comment and review if the board so chooses. And so that kind of gives guidance and credence to that coverage.
So I think what we're saying is I make a motion to amend BGDR to add back the statement, the superintendent will supervise a review of the policy manual on a continued basis. The district may seek the aid of SCSBA and other sources of policy research information in performing this review.
All right, so we have the motion, is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. And so that is a motion to amend policy BGDR as presented with Dr. Powers' change. Is there any additional discussion on that change? All right, all in favor of the, go ahead, Ms. Henson.
I'm sorry?
So, sorry, we spent hours and hours talking through this, and so now we're changing it, so I'm just having to take a moment to think through this. I don't know, I personally don't like the word supervise in there. But,
Okay. All right, we have a motion on the table. All in favor of the amendment as proposed by Dr. Powers, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Opposed.
All right, the amendment passes 4-3. All right, so Are there any other discussion on BG or BGDR? All right, we have a motion on the table with the amendment. All in favor of the policy as amended, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? And the motion carries. All right. Do I hear a motion that the board approve, or excuse me, that the board delete Administrative Rule BDDR, Board Superintendent Relationship?
Madam Chair, I move that the board delete Administrative Rule BDD-R, Board Superintendent Relationship as recommended through the B Policy Review Ad Hoc Committee.
Thank you, Dr. Guyton. Is there a second? Thank you, Mr. Oswald. Is there any discussion? Dr. Guyton, you want to explain this one real quick?
No discussion. This is just, again, consolidating the language of this and the policies that follow to come in accordance with the newly adopted policies, which are, for the most part, all-encompassing of these policies.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion? All right, all in favor of deleting Administrative Rule BDDR, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion carries. Do I hear a motion that the board delete policies BDA, BDB, BDBA, BDBB, BDBC, BDBD, BDC, and BDH?
Madam Chair, I beg your patience, and I move that the board delete the following policies as recommended through the B Policy Review Ad Hoc Committee: Policy BDA, Policy Development System; Policy BDB, Policy Drafting; Policy BDBA, Attorney Involvement in Policy Development; Policy BDBB, Staff Involvement in Policy Development; Policy BDBC, Community Involvement in Policy Development; Policy BDBD, Student Involvement in Policy Development; Policy BDC, Policy Adoption; and finally, BDH, Suspension of Policies.
Thank you, Dr. Guyton. Do I have a second? That was a motion, wasn't it?
That was a motion.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Oswald. Is there any discussion?
I would just like to clarify that we're not deleting these. The information in these have moved to other policies.
Correct. Correct. So we are, well, to the point, we are deleting the policy. However, the sentiment and the language is being adopted in other policies.
Thank you for that clarification. All right, any other discussion or questions? All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Do I hear a motion to approve the second reading of policy BBA, Board Powers and Duties?
Madam Chair, I move that the board approve the second reading of policy BBA, Board Powers and Duties.
Thank you, Dr. Guyton. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Henson. All right, Dr. Guyton.
All right, coming out of committee for final read and comment is policy BBA, and this is specific to board powers and duties. It was sent back to committee regarding further discussion of visits to schools and what that can look like. I will direct you towards that, your attention towards that paragraph. This was done in consideration with Dr. Postlewaite as well, providing some valuable input, and again, open to any feedback regarding the language. It is still, nothing changes with regard to the board visits to schools other than, again, it is for informational purposes. It is never meant to be perceived as an inspection, and that it requires that the board member timely notify staff, including the superintendent, as well as building level administrators.
Thank you. I feel like we've been talking about this policy since like January.
That's what started it.
It's the one that birthed the committee,
It did.
didn't it? Wow. All right.
It's our swan song.
I mean, do you want me, you got another month. You want me to table this until November?
It's our swan song, Madam Chair.
All right. Anyone have any other questions or discussion about this policy?
I just want to thank Dr. Postlewaite for her valuable input on this policy that got us to remove the words in coordination with. That was before your time, but that really kept me out of the schools for quite a while. So, thank you. And thank you to the committee as well for all the hard work.
Indeed, they have put in a lot of time on these. All right, all in favor of policy BBA, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion carries. Congratulations, ad hoc committee, on getting that one across the finish line. All right, do I hear a motion to approve the second reading of policy BBB, board elections?
Madam Chair, I move that the board approve the second reading of policy BBB, board membership elections.
Thank you, Dr. Guyton. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Henson. All right, Dr. Guyton.
So again, this one's pretty simple. This is bringing us into alignment in accordance with South Carolina State statute. Not a whole lot to discuss there. And so what would occur from this is that once the election is certified, then board members will assume, newly elected board members will assume the role 1 week following that.
Pretty straightforward. Just marry it up with the law. All right, any discussion or questions? All right, all in favor of policy BBB as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? And the motion carries. Okay, last month I mentioned that asked the board to consider participation in the South Carolina School Board Association's Legislative Advocacy Conference and Delegate Assembly, which is on December 3rd and 4th. During the business meeting there, delegates from school boards across the state convened to make important decisions on behalf of boards and students in all 81 school districts, and those decisions include electing school board association officers, passing the school board association budget, and approving legislative priorities for advocacy that the school board association folks will then use as their guidepost during the legislative session to advocate for students and teachers in schools. And so those are the decisions that are made by the delegates. Tonight we will vote on the district's Lexington One's delegates to participate in the delegate assembly. So are there any board members that are interested in, so I believe that Ms. Henson and I are planning to attend that assembly. Is there anyone else that is interested in participating as a delegate at that assembly? No? Okay. I would like to propose that our delegates be Ms. Henson, myself, and any newly elected board members in November that want to participate and attend and serve as a delegate. So do I have a motion that the board approve the certification of board members as designated official voting delegates at the South Carolina School Board Association annual meeting on December 3rd, 2022?
So moved.
Thank you, Dr. Powers. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Is there any other discussion? Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Just a point of clarification, will the votes be divided equally among the delegates?
No, ma'am. In November, we will have the legislative priorities, the delegate assembly handbook, and the board will vote to appropriate those. And then we have 9 votes for Lexington One, and all 9 votes are cast on behalf of Lexington One the same way. So
Thank you.
they're not prorated.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for asking about that clarification. All right, any other questions? All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? And the motion carries. All right, do I hear a motion that the board approve the recommendations of the District Instructional Materials Adoption Committee as district-adopted instructional materials for 2022-2023 career and technology education?
Madam Chair, I move the board approve the recommendations of the District Instructional Materials Adoption Committees as district-adopted instructional materials for 2022-2023 career and technology education.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Do I have a second? Second. Thank you, Ms. Henson. Mrs. Gaskins, would you like to explain to us what this motion is?
Sure. So typically, we bring to you the adoption of instructional materials about once a year, and you may have noticed we've been bringing them to you more frequently lately, and that's due to the generosity of the General Assembly. And because of their generosity, we've been able to really get up to date on many of the adoption cycles. And so we were really glad to be able to adopt some materials for our CTE classes. And want to thank Assistant Director Ryan Panter for his work in convening teacher teams to select these materials.
Great. Thank you. Any questions Board for Mrs. Gaskins or anyone else about this? All right. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. All right. This time we're at items for board information, and I'm going to turn this over to Ms. Miller.
All right, good evening, Chairwoman Green, board members, and Superintendent Dr. Postlethwaite. I'm excited to be here tonight. The board packet contains the normal information that you are receiving each month, and I look forward to next month where I'm going to begin to discuss the information that's in that packet and going over those reports. It's my pleasure to serve the district and the community, and my past 17 years as a governmental auditor and my most recent 4 years as the CFO at another district hopefully will prove to be a benefit for the district. We currently have 2 audits going on right now for June 30th, 2022 that the board has approved. The first one is the financial statement audit, and the second one is the procurement examination. And in that financial statement audit, you also have the federal programs being tested, and then part of the procurement examination includes the purchase cards being tested. The auditors have been here since I started in July. It's a lot of work. My past 17 years, I understand completely how much work it is. I appreciate what they're doing. They are an independent audit firm that has no relationship with the district, and then they will present those reports to the board in December. And I would like to thank the finance team members. Along with doing their normal job duties, they have been pulling information since July to get ready for that and assuring their normal duties are completed. And then also the other departments, the federal grants team and human resources have to pull information for these audits as well. So I appreciate everyone's work on that. Next, I just wanted to let you know that we are working on a couple of areas as far as enhancing our procurement purchase card guidelines. While I have found nothing fraudulent, no violations of procurement, I've noticed a few things that we can tighten up some of our own internal controls on. An example for this would be purchases related to students and families that are in need of assistance. The schools are receiving donations, so these are donations that are coming in from private entities such as a church, and then the school is identifying families in need and then giving those funds to those individuals. It's a great item. We have the internal control of having the receipt. We have all that documentation. I would just like to see it go a little further, and we've developed a standardized form just to have consistent documentation for all of those transactions. So again, nothing fraudulent, just enhancing some of the controls that we already have in place. And then I would anticipate that you will, in December, hear some comments from the auditors on those very type of things. So again, I don't think there are any material non-compliance issues. It's just enhancing some of the controls we already have in place. And then lastly, I just want to remind the board that the district procurement code approved that the board is a procurement review panel. And so with that, if there's ever a protest on a solicitation, the board would need to meet, not in the capacity of a board, but just in the capacity of a review panel. And you will have the pleasure of doing that this week. And so you will have an attorney available to assist you through that process, and that will take place this Thursday at 8 a.m. Again, I'm excited to be here and to serve the district, and I look forward to more discussions.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. All right. Okay, before we adjourn, I first of all want to just say how excited and delighted I am that Dr. Postlethwaite is here as our permanent superintendent, and I'm just going to give her another round of applause for, because I just appreciate that you have joined us. And she definitely hit the ground running, and we can already see the good work that you're doing, so we are grateful that you're here with us.
Thank you. And after listening to Mrs. Miller, I realized I probably should have opened tonight thanking the board for the opportunity to serve. I neglected to do that. So she did it so graciously, and I would like to have followed suit had I thought of it earlier. So thank you very much.
I'd like to add in there just a little something that on Fridays, Dr. Postlethwaite has made a habit now of contacting all of the board members by phone to go over things from the previous week or things coming up. And in closing our conversation last Friday, I said, "Are you going home this weekend?" She said, "I am home." We're glad you're here.
And if you ever wondered if she is punctual, we had established that probably around 3 o'clock would be the best time on Fridays for me. At 3 o'clock. I watch my clock and it goes from 2:59 to 3, and at 3 o'clock the phone rings and it's Dr. Postawait. I did want to mention, we have two board candidate forums coming up. The first is going to be sponsored by the Lexington Chamber of Commerce and the Lexington Chronicle, and it's this Thursday night at 5:45 in the North Lake Community Learning Center auditorium. And then the next will be conducted next week, and it's a round table that will be led by the students in the Center for Law and Global Development Center for Law and Global Policy at River Bluff High School, and it will begin at 6:30 p.m. in their River Cafe. So if you can attend those, that would be great, so that you can learn about candidates for that want to sit up here with us. So do I hear a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Madam Chair, motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Guyton. Is there any discussion? All right, all in favor, please say aye and go home.
Aye.
Thank you. Have a great